Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And they led Jesus to the high priest, which were gathered together with the chief priests, elders, and scribes. Now Simon Peter followed afar off, even unto the palace of the high priest, and sat with the servants and warmed himself by the fire. And the chief priests and all the council were gathered together to seek witnesses how they might put Jesus to death. But they found none. For though many came bearing false witness, the testimony agreed not together. Finally certain arose and bare false witness, saying, We heard him say that I will destroy this temple made with hands, and in 3 days build another temple made without hands. But their testimony agreed not together. So here is the taking of Jesus, and the beginning of the questioning. We just saw them come and take him from the Garden of Gethsemane. He was betrayed by Judas. Simon Peter struck off the servant of the high priest's ear. Jesus asked them, Are you come out as against a thief with swords and staves to take me? So now here in this moment, we have a building up. If you understand cooking by pressure, the leaks are sealed, and there's rubber to prevent air from leaking, and then you apply heat, and then it's just pressure, 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 pressure. Jesus, he was preparing his whole life for this moment, with patience, with understanding, with virtue. Every time they arose against him, every time they would make false accusations, they would seek him out, to try and sabotage him. With every city that he would go, dealing with these demons that were possessing people, casting them out, healing these diseases. The Bible says that he took on himself all our infirmities. I would like to ask the question. I don't know the answer, but what does that mean? If he himself took on our infirmities, when he healed the woman with the issue of blood, he said that, I perceive that somebody has touched me. For why? Because virtue is gone out of me. So, where is he putting all these things? And if he's letting out virtue, so, he's built and ready for this moment. It's not just a happenstance by accident. He ended up here, unprepared. Maybe that's why he was so, frustrated with the disciples when they kept falling asleep, because, they were there for every moment, as he was building him. Why could it not be also building them? So here he is led to the palace of the high priest. And, the fact that this guy has a palace, just show you just how far they have come, and, what they have been focusing on, right? Because you remember the original, when children of Israel came out of Egypt, they went through the wilderness. Then they disobeyed God. They didn't get to go into the promised land for 40 years. They wandered, until those that disobeyed him, they passed away. So then, when they finally got there, the land was divided by inheritance, according to the tribes. But the priests, the tribe of Levi, they were not given anything. Everybody else was given, and then they were to donate cities unto them. Their wages was the offering that was brought. If money was brought to the temple, the animals that were sacrificed, they would get the meat, to eat. If you understand kind of life that this would leave you living, not a poor, destitute, life of, but, understand the means that would be available to you, with, the modern mindset that we've come to see. These men, they, got with the in crowd, because it doesn't take long for these things to penetrate. We all have eyes. We all walk around. We see the haves and the have-nots. We desire the respect that the haves, that they have. So, here's one way to get it. Jesus, he accused them, many things of, valuing money over people. When they said, Whosoever shall swear by the altar, it is nothing, but whosoever shall swear by the gold of the altar, he is a debtor, which means that it's a greater offense, to put your hands to the gold that's on the altar and not the altar itself that sanctifieth the gold. The chief priests and the scribes and Pharisees, they always wanted the upper rooms at feast and the chief seats in the synagogue. This was to mean that, they were playing the red carpet treatment. They were playing celebrity here. It got so bad, he would accuse them of devouring widows' houses. So all these things, they come together. And, we have a high priest that now has a palace. Who lives in a palace? The king, right? I mean, what happened to the days of the kings? The king, we know that the kingdom was split into two when, Solomon sinned, and he, worshipped these false gods, that because he had been married to the daughter of Pharaoh of Egypt and other wives, and they came with their false gods, and he would burn sacrifices unto them also. So it was split into Judah, the tribe of Judah, and then the rest of Israel. So there were two kings. Who was the last king? When did that end? We know that right now Pontius Pilate, he's the governor. He's about to stand before him, and in some interpretations we hear even standing before King Herod. Was there no more king of the Jews? Did the high priest take over the king's palace? Or did he have his palace separately made? So that's something interesting to note, that this high priest, he lives in a palace. Knowing that these men, they were to serve people. That was their job. Serve and to make intercession for them. How many sick, how many poor were in Israel? How many in need? And, it's the same thing we see going on today. Ministers saying, God is telling them that there's 20 people in this room with $5,000, and he says it's time to sow it, and sow it right now. Preachers, they have a fee. You have to pay them up front, and it's many thousands depending on how big their name is. So he said, Behold, my reward is with me, and I come quickly. to give unto every man according to that he had done, whether it be good or evil. He often said, unto those that would do, things for praise from men. Here's something that's even worse than praise: money from men. The scribes and Pharisees, when they were fasting, they would disfigure their faces, to appear to fast so that people would feel sorry for them and give them compliments like, oh, he's so religious, he's so, what did Jesus say? Verily I say unto you, they have their reward, look not for another. So if you go around, proclaiming all these things and living this kind of lifestyle, then what reward have ye? So overall, I would say in this moment, we see a lot of, dishonor, disrepute behavior. We see just a lot of, things that we really shouldn't be seeing from these, leaders. Because these were the leaders of the people. Israel, they were a nation of religion, of faith, being, God's true people. We would understand that, these people, they walk by God's statutes. And they were, to present themselves and behave a certain way. So now we see, these religious leaders just being calculating, just being cold. It's like they're operating by just I don't know what's taking over right now inside of them, but it's not good. And there's nobody around to keep your eye on the bottom line. We just saw where they were questioning with him after they tested him with the penny, saying, is it lawful to pay tribute unto Caesar? He said, whose image and superscription is this? He said, Caesar, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar. When the Sadducees tested him that don't believe in the resurrection, but yet still they asked him about 7 brothers who died having the same wife. Who does she belong to in the resurrection? There was one scribe, the one that asked him, what is the greatest commandment? He answered, to love the Lord thy God with all thy soul, heart, mind, and strength. The second is like unto it, love thy neighbor as thyself. The scribe, he answered, discreetly, saying, thou hast well spoken, for there is one God and there is none like he. To love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love thy neighbor as thyself is more than all whole burnt offering and sacrifice. Jesus said unto him, thou art not far from the kingdom of God. So here we have at least evidence of one scribe not being like them. Where was he in this moment? Where were the ones that believed like he did? Being the minority, did they voice their opinion? Were they overpowered? Did they have to just sit there and take it? Did they change their mind? Because, there's no one to rise up right now and to say, what we're doing is wrong. We're telling lies on this man. If we were to examine ourselves, what is the reason why we're coming against him? Are these things that we're doing honorable? How do we look ourselves in the mirror, after all this? How do we keep integrity? How do we get up before the people and address them after having been behaved so disgustingly? And they were the ones in charge. It's not like there was anybody to remove them, So it starts out saying that, they led him away captive to the high priest, which were gathered together, the chief priests, elders, and scribes. Now, they had just taken him. Judas Iscariot, he came with the band of men from the high priest, chief priests, and scribes, giving them the sign, whomsoever I shall kiss, the same as he, hold him fast. Came straightway to him, kissed him, said, Master, Master. And they led him away. That's when Peter, he drew the sword, cut off the servant of the high priest's ear. Jesus, he addressed them. Are you come out as against a thief with swords and staves to take me? I was daily with you teaching in the temple. But all things must be fulfilled. And they all forsook him and fled. Then, the note is made about that guy that followed him, having a, linen cloth cast about his naked body. They tried to lay hands on him, but he fled naked, even the cloth in their hands. So we pick up right here. So they lead him now to the high priest. So now here we come, the highest, authority. Looking back, Moses was, the man of God. But, Aaron, I believe Aaron was his brother or his cousin. I think he was his brother. He was the one, the high priest was over all the minor priests. Once a year, it was his job to go into the Holy of Holies, to make one yearly sacrifice for the entire camp. First for himself and then the entire camp. So now we're understanding right now that, Judas, he came unto them, promising to betray him unto them. And they promised to give Judas money. And then ever since that time, they sought for an opportunity to betray him. So they've been, sitting there waiting for a long time. So, they had many days to think about this. They had many days to be pricked by, the Spirit of God, whatever contact they had left with him. They had days to come to their senses. They had days to think it through. They had days to have dreams, we're about to see, where the governor, his wife, said, see that thou hast nothing to do with that just man. I've suffered many things in a dream this night because of him. They had many days, as you go through your life and you face, certain things, and you might be walking in your house, it might be an early morning or during the day or whenever, and you just get this conviction, against something that maybe shouldn't be going on, something, you get your true feelings about it, where it's raw and it's authentic. It's not something that somebody told you. It's how you feel. It's not something that somebody's trying to convince you or you've been deluded to believe. It's not something that was, given to you or handed to you. This is you. This is, what's going on inside of you. So they had days to wake up. Don't tell me that, you guys are gonna be, doing something like this. But then again, who said that they saw it as something wrong? But promising to give money unto Judas, that should be your first sign. Have you guys ever done anything like this? Has anything like this ever been recorded? So they had many, a lot of, many opportunities, to wake up, feeling differently. Because, what I find, no matter how strong the spirit of deception is on a person, it's like sleep. It resets everything. I would say sleep is a great resetter of the mind. Because you wake up neutral. And then, these things that you believe, you have to actually, pursue these things. And it's like you immerse yourself as one would, like in a, I don't know, like a bathtub full of water. You're taking a bath and not a shower. In that moment when you wake up, I find that the mind is clear. I find that it's neutral. I find that, it's like it can be led into any direction. For you to up, these things that you believed before the previous days, it's an active thing that one does. It's not automatic. If self-help, self-development, it really is a great tool. And that's one of the things that it taught me. I can wake up every day and see, neutral. And then, choose to continue believing whatsoever I believe up until this point. Like I said, the dream. Did they not have any dreams? Did they not get pricked in their conscience? God, He likes to use people to speak to people. And it won't be anybody significant. No, it's going to be small people. It might even be their children. It might be like a spouse, might be like a brother or a sister, a good friend. That they'll have this heaviness on their spirit, and like they try to communicate this to them, even if they can't find the exact words. There's always a warning somehow, because you're about to betray the Messiah. You're about to betray, the way, the truth, and the life, the Son of God Himself that created you. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. God said, let there be light. There was light. What I'm getting at is, so these men, they chose to respond like this. They chose to be like this. They chose to handle the situation in this manner, forsaking all, decency and honor and duty, forsaking, all things, virtuous, all things noble. They're about to exchange Barabbas for Jesus. But how are they any different from Barabbas right now? And it's a lot of them that's there. And nobody is able to ask the right questions. Why are we doing these things? Are we really going to go through with something like this? Do we not see how dishonorable and dishonest, this is? Thou shalt not lie. If there was reason to put him to death, then you guys would have had it. And then, we have this high priest. He knows that, Judas came to, and they promised to give him money. We know that they're waiting to lay hold, on Jesus by being conniving. We know that this is all dishonest. So he himself also has been sitting with this plan. As we're about to see, he knows that they're bringing false witnesses, and he doesn't make that affect his decision on how to handle this thing. This high priest, man, he's gotten himself in so much trouble. He should be the most grateful for Jesus' death. I already said it before, because remember, when he would go into the Holy of Holies once a year, they would, tie a rope around him, and he would have bells on his uniform. They were built into the uniform, so that as long as they heard the bells, they knew that he was still alive. I mean, it was possible for him to die. If he was not right before God, he would die in there, and they would have to pull him out with that rope. So now, Jesus died. Bob says there was a great earthquake. There was, after the darkness, there was a great earthquake. The veil and the temple was rent in twain. It was torn in two, giving us access now into the most holy of holies. Now we are able to make intercession on our own behalf. We are able to go into the, where the high priest would go, spiritually. And I would imagine, maybe even inside the literal holy of holies itself, or maybe God would still hold a kind of reverence for that and not want you to go inside. I don't know, maybe. But the next time he would go in there, he would have died if Jesus did not remove this system. This was of the Old Testament, so now we're in the New Testament. As much as they rejected Jesus and they rejected his work and his mission, this was done away with. So I guarantee you they were still going in there making their sacrifices, their animal sacrifices, because this ended with Jesus and they did not believe on him. So as far as they were concerned, this was still in effect. So they were still bringing their animals, to the temple for it to be slain, the blood to be sprinkled, the meat to be roasted. They were still atoning with the animal blood. We don't know if he had just went in there to do the annual, sacrifice, if he was just about to go in there, if he was like maybe a couple months out, like maybe 6 or 8 months. But I'm not an expert in the Jewish calendar, but this is the feast of Passover, and I would imagine that it would maybe be close. Just knowing what the Passover was, it would. But like I said, I'm not an expert. But I would, if I was to bet, I would put money, on it being close. So no, when they took him, they led him away to the high priest, which was assembled together the chief priests, elders, and scribes. So like I said, the high priest being, the head over all, these guys, to his palace. So now we have the chief priests, the elders and the scribes. I don't really know the difference between the chief priests and the elders. But the chief priests, it would seem as if they would have more authority in the temple. The elders would be those respected. Elder usually is a part of like a council that they vote on things, and they decide how things proceed. I would imagine the chief priests, they had more dealings in the temple. The scribes, they were the ones that mastered the word. Being a scribe, the word was their business, even though it was everybody's. But they were the ones that were isolated for this purpose. When Jesus transfigured on the mountain and he was coming down, the disciples asked him, why then do the scribes say that Elias must first come? So it was the scribe that's keeping record and control of the word itself and all things contained in it, all prophecy, expectation, what should happen. They said that, why say the scribes that Elias must first come? Jesus answered and said, Elias is truly come indeed. What they did unto him whatsoever they listed. Speaking of John the Baptist, Jesus himself asked them, say, why say the scribes that Christ is the son of David? When David himself said by the Holy Ghost, the Lord said unto my Lord, sit thou at my right hand till I make thy enemies thy footstool. It was the scribes that was in charge of like the word, the detail. I want to say the details of the word. So these men, they're all waiting. Judas came. I don't know. It's late in the night. And I don't imagine that these men, they're just sitting around, waiting for no reason. It's late in the night. They must have gone to bed. So somebody must have rounded these guys up if they didn't all also live in the palace of the high priest. So now here they are waiting. Because remember, Judas, he left, while they were eating the Passover. They got separated, so he got enough time to round everybody up and get everybody together. Then it says, so Peter followed afar off, even unto the palace of the high priest, and sat with the servants, warming himself by the fire. So Peter, he's trying to keep as true to his word as possible. He tried defending Jesus with the sword. Jesus told him, put it away. He that taketh the sword shall die with the sword. All the disciples, they forsook him and fled. I imagine Peter, that he might have fled a little bit, but then he stopped and turned around. And he kept enough distance between him and Jesus, enough to see what was going on, but not close enough for them to identify him. Because if they just tried to lay hands on the young man that had the linen cloth around his naked body, and he had to flee naked, but followed him afar off, even unto the palace of the high priest. In this moment, he understands what's about to happen. I see it as one of those moments where it's like you made a decision to go, but then you were pushed back. And it was such a hard decision in the first place that you can't make it a second time. Because when he pulled that sword, he was ready to die with Jesus, as he promised that he would be. But then, Jesus, he pushed that back. So then now, he's falling afar off. To now make the decision to die a second time, that's a hard place to cross mentally. There wouldn't be as much glory. It wouldn't be just a quick strike in battle. But they would, put you to death by such a... Because, who knows if it was stoning. Remember, stoning, that I can't imagine how much that hurt, because the first stone, it probably doesn't kill you. It hurts you. Second stone maybe doesn't kill you either. That hurts you. And now your head is being busted open, slowly. I mean, that has to hurt, right? Jesus, he didn't really reveal unto them that he was to be crucified. That would be even worse, no? So he's following afar off. So now he's sitting with the servants, trying to blend in. We haven't gotten there yet, but they're about to call him out, saying, by how you look and by how you speak, we can tell that you're not one of us. You have a different accent and you dress differently. But here he is trying to blend in. But he must know, the difference between him and them. So Peter, he's watching because he wants to see what happened. He doesn't want to hear it from anybody else. He wants to see, line by line, everything that goes down. It was always Peter. Peter was the one that walked on water. Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come on the water. So I imagine Peter, he's having a mix of emotions, fear, apprehension, uncertainty. But, he's a man of his word, and he's trying to keep to that as much as he can. Then it says, then the chief priests and all the council assembled together, and they sought witnesses how they might put Jesus to death, but they found none. For though many false witnesses came forth, their testimony agreed not together. So a council. So we're gonna have a united decision here. A lot of people, they're gonna have their say, and it's gonna be a collective decision, so that no individual can be blamed. No individual, one person can be blamed. But here we're seeing, false witnesses come forth, and they know that these witnesses are false, and they're not of a mind to say, what are we doing? What's going on? How do we end up here? How do we end up down this road? Are we not supposed to be setting the examples? I mean, these scribes, did they not know of, Aaron's son, the two that Nadab and Abihu. Nadab and Abihu, they offered, when they were just given the law of offering, unto the Lord, just coming out of Egypt, they took it upon themselves to experiment, and they went and presented a thing that the Lord, he did not tell them that he wanted this, and they offered a fire. It was called strange fire, and fire came out from the altar and consumed them, and they died. Did these scribes not have this story in mind when they were making this decision? When they rose up against Moses and the ground opened up and swallowed them. When Miriam cursed, Moses and she became leprous. When Balak, the king, hired the prophet Balaam to curse Israel, both of them died in the next battle. Did they not have the fear of God, running through their veins, being experts in this? Because we have the chief priests, elders, and scribes, and the high priest. So his whole council was assembled together, and they sought witnesses to put him to death. So that was the question. We're here to put him to death. What can we proceed with? And many witnesses came forward. In one interpretation, it even said that they paid these witnesses. Because, obviously they're not going to come and say, something like this without some kind of, reimbursement, some kind of payment. So they sought many false witnesses, but the testimony didn't agree. This was done on the last moment, on the last spot. Were they even sure that this is the route that they would take, using false witnesses? They could have had time to prepare their stories, to give each man his script of what he would say, and have everything agree with each other. But because they were saying so many different things, they couldn't really clamp down on him and say, all right, this is why, and this is why. But then it says, but then came certain, and they bear false witness, saying that we heard him say, behold, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will raise up another temple made without hands. So now as we're winding down, more and more witnesses come together, having, this spectacle. Sooner or later, they got lucky. It doesn't really say, give the accusations here in the book of Mark. Did they forget that they themselves took up stones to stone him when he said, before Abraham was, I am? When they said, thou hast seen Abraham, thou art not yet but 50, yet thou hast seen Abraham. Another time, they wanted to do it again when he, made himself the Son of God. So here come these witnesses testifying the truth. They did hear him say that, but, them missing the meaning. I will destroy this temple made with hands and build another without hands. I believe when he said it, he did say it out there. They said, I forget how many years that this temple was in, and they listed, it was a long period of time. But thou shalt destroy it and rebuild it in 3 days. Was it 40 and 6 years? Somebody can tell me the answer to that. So, when he gave the parable of the sower, behold, a sower went to sow seed, and as he sowed, some seed fell by the wayside, the fowls of the air ate it up. Some seed fell on the stony ground, which had not much earth. Forthwith it sprung up, because it had no deepness of root. When the sun came out, it scorched it, it withered away. Some seed fell among the thorns, which sprang up and choked it, yielded no fruit. But some seed fell on good ground. The disciples said, why speakest unto them in parables? He said, because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God. But unto them that are without, all these things are done in parables. So they did not receive the interpretation of this. Them thinking the temple being, the place of worship, and not his physical body. Did they stop to ask him, okay, so we understand, destroying the temple made with hands. This is the building we can't see. What do you mean by a temple made without hands? It was necessary for his temple to be broken. When he said that, I was wounded for your transgressions and bruised for your iniquity, the chastisement of your peace was upon me, and by my stripes you are healed. He just communion where he took the bread, he broke it and said, take, eat. This is my body which is broken for you. He gave him the cup and said, drink. This is the blood of the new covenant which is shed for many. So, it would seem that this is the issue that they wanted to plug him on. This is the issue they wanted to, bring the gavel down, and pronounce judgment. It's the temple. Because now he's threatening, lawlessness. He's threatening violence. People, they're already following him, right? He has won their hearts completely. And that's why they're having all this problem. It's because he's won their heart and he's not with them. He's not, preaching for the same things that they're preaching for. About money and title and position. The haves and the have-nots. Looking to gain as much as you can, thinking that godliness is gain, as Paul said, overlooking the poor, fatherless, and the widow. As a matter of fact, devouring this widow's houses, taking her life savings just to fund, your lust, on all the things that he accused them of, all the things that he pointed out to them that they were doing. So destroy this temple. Did he say, I will destroy this temple? Or he said, destroy this temple? He's giving them, the command. It's like he's saying, you guys are going to destroy this temple. Even though we know that, he said, no man taketh my life from you, but I lay it down. This commandment I received of the Father, that I may take it, that I may lay it down and pick it up back. So destroy this temple, made with hands, and I will, in 3 days, rebuild another temple made without hands. We know that he was transfigured upon the mountain when he went up with Peter, James, and John. His, raiment became exceeding white as the light, as no fuller on earth can whiten it. The cloud overshadowed them. as he spake with Moses and Elias, saying, This is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. So, is this glory? Is this? He even said, when they came to the tomb, touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father. But he did let, Thomas put his hands into the nail print. And I asked the question, we know Jesus, he heals everyone. Was that wound still fresh, or was it, completely, healed? Because don't tell me I went through all this and then now to make you believe, you got to put your hands inside this. But it says that their testimony agreed not together. So no matter what is going on, they're not. And as you can see, when they take him to Pontius Pilate, as they're about to, the governor, even he wanted to release him because, he realized that their testimony, that everything that they're saying, nothing is lining up. It's just one fishing expedition. At one point, he even said that he realized that they delivered him for envy. I am Straw Greenhorn.